The red dust hadn't settled in Twin Mercy for 3 days straight. It hung in the air like a funeral shroud, coating everything from the wooden sidewalks to the brass spittoons outside Murphy's saloon. Sheriff Eli Mercer stood on the porch of his office, watching the sun bleed orange across the jagged mountains that trapped this town between heaven and hell. 1878 had been cruel to the territory. The wells ran lower each month, and the cattle drives that once brought life to Main Street had dwindled to desperate trickles. But what made Twin Mercy truly suffocate wasn't the drought. It was the iron grip of Silas Braddock. Eli rolled a cigarette with practiced fingers, his gray eyes scanning the empty street. At 35, he'd seen enough death to fill a cemetery, most of it wearing blue or gray uniforms. The war had ended 13 years ago, but some battles never stopped. His badge caught the dying light, a star that meant less with each passing day in a town where justice wore a price tag. The telegraph office door slammed shut across the street. Young Tommy Hayes sprinted toward him, kicking up dust devils in his wake. "Sheriff Storms coming in from the west? Real bad one by the looks of it." Eli nodded, crushing his cigarette beneath his boot. "Get home. Tommy, tell folks to board up tight." As the boy disappeared around the corner, Eli's thoughts drifted to another storm, the fever that had swept through 2 winters back. Mary's laugh, little Sarah's tiny fingers, both silenced in 3 days. The empty house on Sage Street stood as his monument to arriving too late, to failing those who needed him most. The wind picked up, carrying the metallic taste of distant rain and something else trouble. It always tasted the same. By nightfall, the sandstorm hit Twin Mercy like God's own fist. Visibility dropped to nothing, and the howling wind drowned out everything but the rattle of loose shutters. Eli made his rounds, checking on the elderly and making sure the jail's 2 drunks had water. It was near midnight when he heard the horses. 3 riders materialized from the storm like ghosts, their mounts stumbling with exhaustion. Eli stepped out, hand resting on his Colt .45. "That's far enough," he called out, though his voice barely carried over the wind. The lead rider pulled back her hood, a woman, perhaps 30, with sharp features softened by exhaustion. "Please," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "My sisters need shelter. We'll pay." Something in her tone, perhaps the way she said sisters like a prayer, made Eli lower his hand. "Livery's closed, but there's room in the stable behind Doc Avery's. Follow me." He led them through the swirling dust, noting how the middle rider sat her horse despite obvious pain, how the youngest clutched a worn leather satchel like it held the world. They moved their horses into the stable with practiced efficiency, despite their exhaustion. "I'm Margaret Hale," the eldest said once they were out of the storm. "These are my sisters, Ruth and Lena." Ruth, the middle sister, pulled off her hat, revealing auburn hair and eyes that belonged on a wildcat, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She winced as she dismounted, favoring her left side. "You're hurt," Eli observed. "It's nothing," Ruth said quickly, but her hand pressed against her ribs betrayed her. "I'll fetch Doc Avery," Eli said. "No." The word came out sharper than a drawn blade. Ruth softened her tone. "I mean, it's late. I'll manage till morning." Lena, barely 20 by Eli's guess, hadn't spoken. She clutched her satchel and watched him with eyes that had seen too much. A silver cross hung from her neck, catching the lantern-light quality silver, the kind that told stories. "You ladies traveling far?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. Everything about them screamed running. "California," Margaret said smoothly. "Our aunt has a boarding house in Sacramento." "Long way to travel in storm season." "Couldn't be helped," Ruth interjected, and there was steel in her voice. "Sometimes you leave when you have to, not when you want to." Eli understood that truth better than most. "Mrs. Boyle runs a clean boarding house on 2nd Street. Tell her I sent you. She'll have hot water and beds that don't kick." "Thank you," Sheriff Mercer, Eli Mercer. Ruth's eyes met his then, really met them, and something passed between them, recognition. Maybe, though not of faces, recognition of something deeper, the kind of understanding that came from carrying ghosts. Morning brought clear skies and gossip. Eli was pouring his second cup of coffee when Cole Garrett swaggered into his office. Garrett had the kind of face mothers warned their daughters about handsome until you noticed the cruel twist to his mouth, the way his hand always hovered near his gun. "Boss wants to see you," Garrett said, helping himself to a seat. "Braddock can want all he likes. He knows where to find me." Garrett's smile was all teeth. "Friendly warning. Sheriff, we got word about some thieves heading this way. 3 of them. Stole the mine payroll up near Cedar Ridge. Shot one of Mr. Braddock's men in the process." "That so got descriptions?" 3 women, sisters, supposedly. One of them's real handy with horses." Garrett leaned back, his spurs scraping against the floor. "Mister, Braddock's offering $1,000 for their return. Alive, preferably. He's got questions needs answering." After Garrett left, trailing threat like cologne, Eli sat in the silence of his office. 3 sisters, one good with horses. He thought of Ruth's wince, the kind that came from a bullet graze, not a fall. He found them at Caleb Dunn's place on the edge of town. The old man ran a small horse operation, breeding Mustangs for the cavalry. Ruth was in the corral, working with a stallion everyone else had given up on. The horse, 16 hands of pure black fury, stood calmly as she ran her hands along his neck, whispering something Eli couldn't hear. "That's impossible," Caleb said from beside him. "That demon's been trying to kill everyone who comes near him for 2 months. Maybe he just needed someone who speaks his language," Eli said. Ruth must have sensed him watching. She turned, her face flushing when she saw his badge catching the morning sun. She left the horse and walked over, each step measured. "Sheriff, come to check on the suspicious strangers. Come to see about that injury you're not hiding very well." She smiled then, just a little. "Persistent, aren't you?" It's been mentioned, usually as a criticism. Despite her protests, he convinced her to let him look. The graze along her ribs was healing clean, but it was unmistakably from a bullet. His fingers were gentle as he applied fresh bandage, but he felt her tense. "This needs to be cleaned proper," he said. "Infection's no joke out here. I've had worse." "I don't doubt it." She studied his face as he worked. "You're not like most lawmen I've known." That's supposed to be a compliment. "Jury's still out." Lena appeared in the barn doorway. "Ruth, Margaret needs—" She stopped, seeing Eli. Her hand went instinctively to the cross at her throat. That's when Cole Garrett's voice cut through the morning air. Well, what do we have here?" Garrett stood at the corral fence with 2 other Braddock men. His eyes were fixed on Lena's cross, and his smile grew wider. "That's a real pretty necklace, Miss. Silver work like that. With those markings, that's Fort Worth craftsmanship. Had a friend used to make crosses just like that. Man named Hale. Course, he's dead now. Whole family is, except for his daughters who murdered one of Mr. Braddock's men and stole his money." Ruth stepped forward, putting herself between Garrett and her sister. "You're mistaken." "Am I?" Garrett's hand dropped to his gun. "How about you all come with us peaceful like Mr. Braddock just wants to talk." "They're not going anywhere," Eli said quietly, moving to stand beside Ruth. "Now, Sheriff, you sure you want to take that position? These are wanted criminals. All I see are 3 women who've been traveling hard and a silver cross that could have come from anywhere. You got proof otherwise. You bring it to my office. With warrants. Otherwise, you and your boys can get off Mr. Dunn's property." The air went tight as a drawn bowstring. Garrett's fingers drummed against his holster. "This ain't over," he said finally. "Mr. Braddock don't like being robbed, And Judge Pike? Well, he takes a real dim view of thieves. Real dim. After they left, Ruth turned to Eli. Why? Because Garrett's a snake, and Braddock's worse. Because whatever you're running from, I'd bet my badge it's more complicated than they're saying. You could lose that badge. Wouldn't be the worst thing I've lost. Margaret emerged from the barn, her face grave. We should go. We've brought you enough trouble. Running won't help, Eli said. Not now. Garrett's seen that cross. By noon, everyone in town will know who Braddock thinks you are. Then what do you suggest? Ruth asked. The truth might be a good start. The three sisters exchanged glances, entire conversations in a look. The truth, Margaret said slowly, is that our mother is dead. The truth is that Braddock killed her. And the truth is that we're next, unless we keep running. The wind picked up again, carrying dust and the promise of more storms. Eli looked at the three women, Margaret with her quiet strength, Lena clutching her murdered father's cross, and Ruth, who'd rather take a bullet than trust a lawman but was trusting him anyway. Then I guess we'd better make sure you don't have to run anymore, he said. Ruth's eyes widened slightly. You believe us just like that? I've been sheriff here 3 years. In that time, I've watched Braddock destroy 5 families who wouldn't sell their water rights. I've seen Judge Pike send innocent men to prison on Braddock's word. I've written reports about accidents that weren't accidents and suicides that weren't suicides. So yes, Miss Hale, I believe you. It's Ruth, she said softly. If you're planning to stand between us and Braddock, you should probably call me Ruth. As if in answer to his declaration, the church bell began to toll not the steady rhythm of the hour, but the rapid clanging that meant trouble, real trouble. Tommy Hayes came running again, his face red with exertion. Sheriff Mister, Braddock's in town. He's got a dozen men with him and Judge Pike. They're posting notices, $1,000 reward for 3 female fugitives, armed and dangerous. Says they killed a mine guard and stole payroll money. Eli looked at the sisters. Seems Braddock's making his move. Question is, what are we going to do about it? Ruth stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the sage and horse on her clothes. We've been running for 2 weeks. I'm tired of it. Could get ugly. Sheriff Mercer? She said, and there was something fierce and beautiful in her eyes. Ugly found us a long time ago. Maybe it's time we returned the favor. The storm had passed, but Twin Mercy was about to learn that some tempests were just beginning, and standing there, watching Ruth Hale prepare to fight instead of flee. Eli Mercer felt something he hadn't felt since before the fever took his family hope. Dangerous, probably foolish, definitely complicated hope. But then again, nothing worthwhile ever came easy in Twin Mercy. The red dust settled around them like a promise, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains. The ledger made no sense. Eli squinted at the columns of numbers in the lamplight, comparing them to the receipts from Braddock's mine operation. He'd convinced Judge Pike's clerk, nervous Walter Jennings, to let him verify some tax records while the judge was away at lunch. What he found made his blood run cold. Miscellaneous expenses appeared every few weeks, always round numbers, always coinciding with local accidents. $500 the week the Hendricks families well mysteriously went dry. $800 when old Tom Martinez fell from his barn loft and broke his neck. $1,000 exactly 3 days before Ruth's mother died. Find what you're looking for. Sheriff? Eli didn't flinch at Cole Garrett's voice. He'd heard the spurs coming up the stairs. Just doing my job. Garrett, making sure the town's books are in order. Funny thing about books, Garrett said, leaning against the doorframe. Sometimes they tell stories nobody wants to hear. Sometimes they tell stories everybody needs to hear. Garrett's hand drifted to his pistol. Mr. Braddock wouldn't appreciate you poking around in his private business. Good thing these are public records, then. They stared at each other across the dusty office. Finally, Garrett smiled the kind of smile that made good folks lock their doors. "You're playing a dangerous game. Sheriff, those Hale women got you all turned around. Pretty face will do that to a man." "Which pretty face would that be? The eldest, who could probably outthink you with half her mind tied behind her back? The youngest, who's got more courage in her little finger than you've got in your whole body? Or the middle one, who tamed Caleb's demon horse while you and your boys are still scared to go near him?" Garrett's face darkened. "Keep talking. Sheriff, every word's just another nail in your coffin." After he left, Eli carefully copied the most damning entries into his notebook. The pieces were falling into place, painting a picture of systematic terror and legal theft. But he needed more than suspicious bookkeeping to take down Braddock. He found Ruth at the boarding house, teaching Lena how to clean her father's revolver. The sight of her sure hands guiding her sisters made something tighten in his chest. "Planning on starting a war?" he asked from the doorway. Ruth looked up, a strand of auburn hair falling across her face. "Planning on finishing one. You find anything?" "Maybe. Braddock's books have more holes than Swiss cheese, but Judge Pike won't move on maybes." "Then we need certainties." Ruth set down the gun and walked to the window, gazing out at the dusty street. "Margaret's been asking around, careful like. Seems we're not the only family Braddock's destroyed. Most folks are too scared to talk. Most folks haven't lost everything yet." She turned to face him. "We have... makes us dangerous. Also makes you targets." "We were already targets. Sheriff, difference is, now we're shooting back." 3 days later, the sisters started working at Caleb Dunn's ranch. It was Eli's idea, keep them visible, part of the community. Harder to make people disappear when everyone knew their names. Ruth took to the work like she was born to it. Within a week, she had the ranch running smoother than it had in years. Horses that hadn't let anyone near them in months were eating from her hand. Even the ranch hands, initially suspicious, found themselves won over by her no-nonsense competence. "That girl's got a gift," Caleb told Eli one evening as they watched Ruth work with a young mare. "Never seen anything like it. It's like she speaks their language. Maybe she understands what it's like to be broken and afraid," Eli said quietly. Caleb gave him a long look. "You're getting attached. Son, that's dangerous in your line of work." "Everything's dangerous these days, Caleb." Lena had started teaching letters to the local children in the church. Pastor Elijah Reese, a man who believed God's work included education, had welcomed her with open arms. Within days, she had a dozen pupils, their voices carrying through the open windows as they practiced their ABCs. Margaret, meanwhile, moved through town like a ghost, appearing at the general store, the post office, the saloon's back door where the working girls gathered. She listened more than she talked, and what she heard painted an increasingly dark picture. "Sarah Morrison says her husband didn't just fall down that mine shaft," Margaret reported one evening as the 4 of them gathered in Eli's office. "Says he found something in the eastern tunnel, something Braddock didn't want found. Next day, he was dead." "The eastern tunnel's been closed for 2 years, Eli said. "Supposedly flooded." "Supposedly?" Margaret repeated with a meaningful look. It was Ruth who connected the dots. "What if it's not water rights Braddock's after? What if there's something else?" Before Eli could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the evening quiet. Through the window, they could see flames licking at Caleb's barn. They ran, Eli and Ruth in the lead, Margaret pulling Lena behind her. By the time they reached the ranch, the fire had spread to the hayloft. Horses screamed in terror, trapped in their stalls. "The horses!" Ruth didn't hesitate, plunging into the smoke-filled barn. "Ruth, no." Eli followed her without thinking. Inside was chaos. Smoke thick as wool. Heat that seared the lungs. Ruth had already freed 2 horses, slapping their rumps to send them fleeing. She was working on the 3rd when a beam cracked overhead. Eli caught her around the waist, pulling her aside as burning timber crashed where she'd been standing. "We have to get out." "Not without them." She broke free, stumbling toward the remaining stalls. Together they worked, Eli breaking locks, while Ruth calmed the panicked animals enough to lead them out. The smoke grew thicker, the heat unbearable. Ruth's coughs turned harsh, rattling. The last horse, Caleb's prize mare, refused to budge, wild with terror. Ruth dropped to her knees, taking the horse's head in her hands, whispering urgently. The building groaned around them. "Ruth, now!" The mare suddenly bolted for the door. Eli grabbed Ruth, half carrying her as they stumbled after the horse. They burst into the night air just as part of the roof collapsed. Ruth fell to her knees, coughing violently. Eli knelt beside her, one hand on her back, the other brushing ash from her face. "You could have died," he said roughly. "So could they," she gasped between coughs. "The horses aren't worth your life." She looked up at him, eyes watering from smoke but fierce nonetheless. "Everything innocent is worth saving. Sheriff, thought you'd understand that." He did understand. God help him, he did. Caleb appeared with water buckets, and soon a chain formed, townspeople appearing from nowhere to fight the flames. It was too late for the barn, but they saved the other buildings. As dawn broke over the charred remains, Garrett and 5 of Braddock's men rode up, guns conspicuously displayed. Shame about the fire. Garrett drawled, "These old buildings, they're just tinder boxes. All it takes is one careless spark." "Or one careful match," Eli countered. "That's a serious accusation. Sheriff, hope you got proof." From the ashes, Lena emerged holding something. "I found this," she said quietly, handing Eli a piece of scorched leather. It was part of a saddlebag, singed but still bearing an embossed design, SB intertwined with a pickaxe, Silas Braddock's personal brand. Garrett's eyes narrowed. "That doesn't prove anything. Could have been there for months." "Could have," Eli agreed. "Course, it's interesting how it ended up right where the fire started, almost like someone dropped it while pouring kerosene." The tension stretched taut. Several townspeople had gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Doc Avery stood with them, his medical bag in hand, having come to check on those who'd fought the fire. "You all saw what happens to folks who harbor fugitives," Garrett announced loudly. "Mr. Braddock's a patient man, but his patience has limits. Be a shame if more accidents happened." "Only accident here is you thinking you can threaten these people." Ruth stepped forward, ash-streaked but unbowed. "You want us, come and take us, but stop hiding behind hired torches and midnight raids. Or are you too yellow to face us in daylight?" Garrett's hand went to his gun. Eli's was faster, his Colt clearing leather before Garrett's fingers touched metal. "I wouldn't," Eli said softly. "See, burning a barn's one thing. Drawing on a sheriff in front of witnesses, that's another. Even Judge Pike would have trouble explaining that away." "This ain't over," Garrett snarled. "No," Ruth agreed. "It's just beginning." After Braddock's men left, Caleb surveyed his ruined barn with remarkable calm. "Well," he said finally, "always wanted to build a bigger one anyway." "I'm sorry," Ruth said. "This is because of us." "No," the old man replied firmly. "This is because Silas Braddock's a snake who's been squeezing this town dry for years. You ladies just gave him an excuse to show his true colors." That evening, Doc Avery appeared at Eli's office. The elderly physician looked troubled, glancing nervously over his shoulder before entering. "Sheriff, I need to tell you something, but if it gets back to Braddock, it won't." Doc Avery sat heavily, pulling out a flask and taking a medicinal swig before continuing. 2 weeks ago, night of the 15th, a woman came to my door. She'd been hurt badly. Said her name was Catherine Hale. Ruth, who'd been cleaning her rifle in the corner, went very still. "I did what I could," Doc continued, "but she was too far gone. Before the end, she kept saying she had to warn her daughters. Said Braddock had found the old Spanish mine records, the ones that proved her husband's family had legal claim to the Eastern Valley. The valley Braddock's been trying to buy up, Eli said slowly. The valley that's worthless for cattle but would be perfect for a rail depot, Margaret added from the doorway. I've been checking. The railroad's planning to extend the line. Whoever owns that land will make a fortune. She gave me this. Doc Avery pulled out a folded paper. Made me promise to get it to her girls if anything happened to her. But then I heard about the reward, and I'm a coward, Sheriff. But I can't sleep anymore. Can't live with keeping quiet. Ruth took the paper with shaking hands. It was a deed, old but legal, granting mineral and land rights to the Hale family. This is what he killed her for, she whispered. We need more than a deed, Eli said. We need to prove Braddock ordered the killing. Then we need to get into that mine, Ruth said. If there are Spanish records, if there's evidence. It's too dangerous, Eli started. Everything's dangerous. Ruth cut him off, echoing his own words back to him. But this is worth the risk. Looking at her fierce determination, at Margaret's quiet strength and Lena's steady courage, Eli made a decision that would change everything. All right, he said. We go to the mine, but we do it my way, and we do it smart. Doc Avery stood to leave, then paused. Sheriff, that woman, Mrs. Hale, she said something else before she passed. Said to tell her girls she was proud of them. Said they were stronger than they knew. Ruth turned away, but not before Eli saw the tears she refused to shed. He wanted to comfort her, but knew she'd accept none. Not yet, not until justice was done. Outside, storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, but this time, Eli thought they were ready for whatever came next. The blood trail led to truth, and truth, in Twin Mercy, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Market day in Twin Mercy brought folks from miles around, turning the usually quiet streets into a maze of wagons, livestock, and humanity. It was the perfect place to disappear in plain sight or to be spotted by the wrong eyes. Ruth studied herself in the boarding house mirror, uncomfortable in Margaret's blue Sunday dress. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, too soft after weeks in trail clothes and work pants. The hat, Margaret insisted, pinning a wide-brimmed bonnet over Ruth's auburn hair. Cover as much as you can. I look ridiculous. You look like a proper lady shopping for provisions, Margaret countered, which is exactly what we need. I don't do proper lady well. Then pretend you're gentling a skittish horse, Lena suggested from the doorway. Same principle, move calm, breathe easy. Don't make sudden gestures. Despite her discomfort, Ruth had to smile. Trust her baby sister to reduce feminine deportment to horse training. The market square bustled with activity. Ruth kept her head down, basket over her arm, moving between the stalls, selling everything from pickled preserves to horseshoes. She needed information specifically. Which suppliers were still independent and which had been forced into Braddock's pocket. She was examining bolts of fabric, pretending interest in a particularly hideous yellow print, when she felt eyes on her, not the casual glance of a passerby, but the focused attention of a predator. Cole Garrett leaned against a post 20 feet away, cleaning his fingernails with a knife. His eyes never left her. Ruth forced herself to continue shopping, even as her heart hammered against the borrowed corset. She haggled half-heartedly over the price of thread, aware of Garrett closing the distance between them. Well now. His voice slithered over her shoulder. Don't believe I've had the pleasure. Miss, new in town. Ruth kept her face turned away. Just passing through. Funny thing, you put me in mind of someone. Course, the woman I'm thinking of doesn't wear such pretty dresses. More the pants-wearing, horse-stealing type. Ruth's hand inched toward the small pistol hidden in her basket. But before she could react, another voice cut through the tension. They're a problem here. Garrett. Eli stood 3 feet away, badge catching the morning sun, hand resting casual-like on his gun belt. But Ruth knew him well enough now to recognize the coiled readiness in his stance. "Just being friendly, Sheriff. Introducing myself to this lovely lady. The lady doesn't seem interested in your introduction. Now, how would you know what the lady's interested in?" Garrett's smile turned sly. "Unless you already know her. Do you, Sheriff, know this lady? It was a trap. Neat as you please. Deny knowing her, and Garrett would push harder, maybe force a confrontation, admit to knowing her, and blow her cover. But Eli did neither. Instead, he looked at Ruth, really looked at her, his gray eyes moving over her face like a touch. I know she's got pride in her backbone and courage in her heart. I know she'd risk her life for those she loves and stands up to bullies even when her knees are shaking. I know she's wearing her sister's dress because she's trying to protect people, not because she's hiding who she really is." The words hung in the air between them. Ruth felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "She wore her sister's dress," Garrett said slowly, understanding dawning. "Well, I'll be damned. It is her." But the sheriff undressed her with his eyes. Eli continued, his voice dropping low. "And his heart. And what he saw wasn't a fugitive or a thief. He saw a woman worth fighting for." Ruth's breath caught. Around them, the market noise faded to a distant hum. Garrett laughed, ugly and sharp. "That's real touching, Sheriff, real poetic. But poetry won't stop a bullet, and it won't change the law. Judge Pike issued new warrants this morning. Dead or alive this time. Then I guess it's good the lady's under my protection." "Your protection?" Garrett stepped closer. "You willing to bet your life on that protection? Mercer, because that's what you're doing." "Already made that bet," Eli said simply. They stood frozen, a tableau of tension in the middle of the bustling market. Then Ruth did something that surprised them all. She laughed. "Gentlemen," she said, dropping the fake timidity and letting her real voice ring out. "While I appreciate the display of masculine posturing, I've got shopping to finish. Mr. Garrett, if you're done trying to intimidate me, kindly step aside. Sheriff, if you're done making declarations, you can carry my basket." She pushed between them, head high despite the trembling in her hands. After a moment, Eli fell into step beside her, taking the basket as ordered. Garrett called after them. "This ain't over. Hale, you and your sisters got maybe 2 days before Mr. Braddock loses patience complete. Then we'd better make them count." Ruth called back without turning. They walked in silence until they reached the quiet shade of the churchyard. Only then did Ruth's composure crack. She sank onto a bench, hands shaking as she unpinned the ridiculous bonnet. "That was foolish," she breathed. "That was magnificent," Eli countered, sitting beside her. "Though we've got bigger problems now. If Pike's issued dead or alive warrants." "Did you mean it?" The question escaped before Ruth could stop it. "What you said back there?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. Every word. "You barely know me." "I know enough." "I'm trouble, Eli. Nothing but trouble for anyone close to me." "Ruth." He turned to face her fully. "I lost my wife and daughter 2 years ago. Fever took them while I was 3 towns over, chasing rustlers who didn't matter. I've spent every day since wondering what kind of man puts duty before family. Arrives too late to even say goodbye." Ruth's hand found his without conscious thought. "Then you rode in," he continued, "ready to take on the world to protect your sisters? You look at injustice and don't back down. You save horses from burning barns and teach pride to broken things. You think I care that you're wearing a borrowed dress or that Braddock's got paper on you? The law. The law's been bought and sold in this town for years, but justice, that's different. That's what we're fighting for." Before Ruth could respond, running footsteps interrupted. Young Tommy Hayes, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Sheriff, Miss Ruth. You gotta come quick, there's been an accident at Caleb's place." They ran, Ruth hiking up Margaret's skirts with no thought for propriety. What they found at the ranch made her stomach turn. The new corral they'd built to replace the burned barn was destroyed. Posts snapped like kindling. In the wreckage lay Caleb's prize stallion, the one Ruth had spent weeks gentling. His leg was broken, bone showing white through black hide. "No!" Ruth dropped beside the animal, hands gentle on his neck as he thrashed in pain. "No, no, no!" Caleb stood nearby, face grim. "Happened an hour ago. Someone cut the support posts near through, then fired a gun to spook him. He hit the fence full gallop." "Where's Doc Avery?" Eli demanded. "Won't do no good," Caleb said quietly. "The leg's shattered. Only one thing to do now." Ruth looked up, tears streaming. "He trusted me. I promised him he'd be safe." Eli knelt beside her. "This isn't your fault." "Isn't it? They're destroying everything we touch." Margaret and Lena arrived. Having heard the commotion, Lena gasped at the sight, while Margaret's face went cold as winter stone. "They want us to run," Margaret said, "want us scared and scattered." "It's working," Ruth said bitterly. "No." Lena's quiet voice carried surprising steel. "They want us to break. There's a difference." Caleb handed his rifle to Ruth. "He trusts you, girl. Should be you that does it." Ruth's hands shook as she took the weapon. The stallion's eyes found hers, deep and knowing. She whispered to him, the same wordless song she'd used to calm him, to earn his trust. Her finger found the trigger. The shot echoed across the valley. Ruth stayed on her knees in the dust, Margaret's blue dress stained with blood and dirt. Eli's hand rested on her shoulder, solid and warm. "I'm done running," Ruth said finally, voice rough. "Done letting them hurt innocent things." She stood, turning to face the others. "Margaret, remember what Mama used to say about how sometimes the only way out is through?" "I remember." "Then let's go through." Ruth looked at Eli. "That evidence you need the papers in the mine, I'll get them." "We'll get them," Eli corrected. "This is our fight." "No." His voice brooked no argument. "This became our fight the moment you trusted me enough to stop running. We do this together, or not at all." That night, as Ruth burned Margaret's ruined dress and changed back into her own clothes, she thought about masks and truth, about the things we hide and the moments we choose to reveal ourselves. Eli had seen through her disguise, not because the dress didn't fit, but because he'd been looking at her, really looking from the beginning. He saw past the roles she played: sister, protector, fugitive to something essential underneath. In the morning, Garrett would report back to Braddock. The warrants would be enforced. The slim protection of anonymity was gone. But tonight, cleaning her rifle by lamplight while her sisters planned and Eli studied maps of the mine, Ruth felt something she hadn't experienced since the night they'd fled their burning home. Hope. It was dangerous, probably foolish, but like the sheriff who'd staked his life on protecting them, sometimes the greatest risks brought the greatest rewards. The stallion's blood had sealed her decision. No more running, no more letting innocent things suffer. Time to make Silas Braddock pay. The courthouse in Silver Creek stood 40 miles from Twin Mercy, a journey that took Eli most of the night. He'd left before dawn, saddlebags heavy with evidence, the copied ledgers, the Spanish land grant, Doc Avery's sworn statement, and the piece of Braddock's saddlebag from the fire. Judge William Thornton was the circuit judge, one of the few honest men left in the territory. If anyone would listen, it would be him. But as Eli climbed the courthouse steps, Marshal Ben Cray stepped out of the shadows. "Been expecting you. Mercer?" "Ben." Eli nodded to his old friend from the war. "Guess word travels fast. Faster when Judge Pike sends telegrams to every lawman in 3 counties. Says you've gone rogue, protecting known fugitives." "You believe that?" Cray studied him with keen eyes. I believe you're the most honest man I know. Also the most stubborn. Come on. Thornton's waiting. Judge Thornton's chambers smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. The judge himself, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, reviewed Eli's evidence in silence. 20 minutes passed. 30. Finally, he looked up. This is serious. Sheriff, these accusations against Braddock are true, Your Honor. Every word. Perhaps, but without witnesses willing to testify in open court. It's your word against his. And these women you're protecting, they're still wanted for robbery and murder. A robbery that never happened and a murder in self-defense, if it happened at all. Can you prove that? Eli's silence was answer enough. Thornton sighed. I can't override Pike's warrants without cause, Eli, and I can't issue warrants against Braddock based on suspicion and bookkeeping irregularities. So he wins. I didn't say that. Thornton leaned back. But you need more witnesses, documents, something ironclad. If I get that, then I'll convene a special session. Pike won't be able to block it. Thornton paused. You're risking everything for these women. Why? Eli thought of Ruth's fierce eyes, of Margaret's quiet strength, of Lena's courage, because someone has to. The ride back to Twin Mercy felt longer, weighted with disappointment. As he crested the last ridge before town, Eli saw smoke rising from Main Street. His heart clenched. But it wasn't fire. It was a crowd. Half the town gathered outside his office. Voices raised in argument. At the center stood Ruth, Margaret, and Lena, surrounded by Braddock's men. Eli spurred his horse harder. Got no right, someone shouted. He recognized Hank Morrison, whose brother had died in that mine accident. Got every right. Cole Garrett replied, warrant in hand, dead or alive. Says so right here. Since when do we shoot women in the street, Mrs.? Boyle demanded, pushing through the crowd. What kind of town are we? The kind that follows the law. Judge Pike announced from the courthouse steps. These women are dangerous criminals. They're school teachers and horse trainers, Pastor Reese countered. I've seen Miss Lena with the children. Does that look like a killer to you? Eli dismounted at the edge of the crowd, working his way forward. He caught Ruth's eye. She stood protective in front of her sisters, chin raised despite being outnumbered 10-1. Enough! Eli's voice cut through the noise. The crowd parted, letting him through. Garrett, lower that weapon! Can't do it. Sheriff, we got legal warrants. Warrants based on lies. That's for a judge to decide. Pike interjected. After they're arrested or buried. Your Honor. Margaret stepped forward, voice carrying clear and strong. We'll submit to arrest, but we want a proper trial, here, in front of the whole town. Pike's eyes narrowed. The trial would be in Silver Creek. No. Eli moved to stand beside the sisters. Circuit Court can convene anywhere. I've already spoken to Judge Thornton. He's willing to come here. Hold the trial in Twin Mercy. That's irregular. So is issuing death warrants for women based on the word of a man who burns barns and breaks horses' legs for intimidation. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some folks looked away, but others those who'd lost family, property. Hope to Braddock's greed stood a little straighter. You've chosen your side, Mercer. Pike said coldly, so be it. Garrett, arrest them all. The sheriff, too, for obstruction. I don't think so. The voice came from the back of the crowd. People turned to see a small, neat man in a dusty black coat. And who might you be? Pike demanded. Thomas Bradley, Deputy U.S. Marshal. He showed his badge. Got word there might be some irregularities in the territorial justice system. Thought I'd come take a look. Eli had never heard of Thomas Bradley, but he recognized the badge as genuine. More interesting was the way Pike's face paled. Now, Bradley continued, moving through the crowd with easy authority. Seems to me if these ladies are willing to stand trial, and Sheriff Mercer vouches for them, we can handle this all legal-like. Release them to the sheriff's custody pending trial. But, unless you got some objection to following proper procedure, Judge Pike. Pike's jaw worked like he was chewing nails. 3 days. If Thornton's not here in 3 days, we proceed with the original warrants. Fair enough? Bradley turned to Eli. Sheriff, I trust you'll keep track of your charges. With my life, Marshal. As the crowd dispersed, Ruth touched Eli's arm. Oh, you... Marshal showing up just when we needed him. Sometimes we get lucky. I don't believe in that kind of luck. But she was smiling. That evening, they gathered in the church neutral ground. Pastor Reese insisted. The sisters, Eli, Doc Avery, and surprisingly, a dozen townspeople who decided they'd had enough. We need witnesses, Eli explained. People willing to testify about what Braddock's done. Testifying means risking everything. Hank Morrison said, our homes, our families. You've already lost family, Ruth said quietly. So have we. Question is, how many more have to lose before we say enough? Easy for you to say. Another man argued. You're already wanted. We got something to lose. Do you? Margaret asked. Really, your water rights are being stolen. Your land's being grabbed. Your families are being threatened. What exactly are you protecting by staying silent? Our lives. Your lives. Lena stood, young face fierce. What kind of life is it when you can't walk down the street without fear, when you can't speak truth because a rich man might not like it? That's not living. That's just existing. The room fell silent. Then Hank Morrison cleared his throat. My brother found silver in that eastern tunnel. Good vein, too. Told Braddock he'd need to renegotiate the mineral rights contract. Next day, he swallowed hard. Next day, he was dead. I saw Garrett and 2 others riding out toward the Hale place that night. Mrs. Boyle added. Night their mother died. Saw them coming back, too. Had blood on their clothes. One by one, others spoke up. Small things, mostly. Threats overheard. Payments witnessed. Documents signed under duress. Each testimony alone meant little. Together, they painted a damning picture. Will you testify in court? Eli asked. Under oath, knowing Braddock will be there. Watching. The silence stretched long. Then Doc Avery stood. 20 years I've kept quiet. 20 years of patching up accidents and keeping my mouth shut. No more. Fear of living like a coward is worse than fear of dying like a man. Doc's right, Pastor Reese added. What good is saving our lives if we lose our souls in the process? I'll testify, Hank said. Others nodded agreement. Ruth found Eli outside after the meeting, standing in the cold starlight. Think it'll be enough? She asked. Has to be. She moved closer, drawn by his solid presence. That Marshal Bradley, you didn't seem surprised to see him. I sent a telegram from Silver Creek to an old friend in the Marshal's service. Seems he came through. You're full of surprises. Eli Mercer. Not really, just a man trying to do right. That's rarer than you think. She pulled something from her pocket, a folding knife with worn handle. This was my mother's. Her father gave it to her when she married. Said a woman should always have good steel close by. Ruth? I want you to have it. She pressed it into his hand. You've risked everything for us. It's all I have that matters. Eli closed his fingers around the knife, then around her hand. Not all. They stood there, hands joined, as the night wind whispered promises of storms to come. Inside the church, their allies planned for battle. In 3 days, everything would be decided. Whatever happens, Ruth said softly, I want you to know, I trust you, completely. For a man who'd lived with the weight of arriving too late, those words were everything, as if in mockery of the moment. The church bell began to toll, not the measured ring of the hour, but the rapid clanging of alarm. "Fire?" Ruth asked. "No." Eli's face was grim. "That's the jail bell. Someone's escaping, or—" Gunshots cracked through the night air, then screams. They ran toward Main Street to find chaos. The jail doors hung open. Inside, Deputy Fuller lay groaning, blood seeping from a head wound. "What happened?" Eli demanded, kneeling beside him. "Garrett had a prisoner transport, said he was taking someone to Silver Creek, but when I checked, the cell was already empty." "Who was the prisoner?" Fuller's eyes flickered to Ruth. "They had your sister, the young one." "Lena," Ruth's voice broke. "But she was just at the church." "Must have grabbed her when she left early." Fuller gasped. "I'm sorry. Sheriff, they had papers. Looked official, son." Ruth was already moving, running for the stables. Eli caught her arm. "Wait, we don't know where they've taken her." "I do." Her eyes were wild but certain. "The mine. They'll take her to the mine. It's isolated, and Braddock owns every man there." "Then we need help." "There's no time." She wrenched free. "You gather whoever will come. I'm going after my sister." She was on her horse and gone before he could stop her, riding into the darkness like vengeance itself. Eli turned to find Margaret already mounted, rifle across her saddle. "You planning to stop me, Sheriff?" "Planning to help you," he replied, swinging onto his own horse. "Let's go get your sister." Behind them, the bell continued to toll, calling the town to witness. The time for legal maneuvering was over. Now it was personal. The old Caleb ranch looked different in darkness. What had been a haven now felt like a trap, surrounded by Braddock's men moving like shadows against the stars. Eli counted 8 gunmen, maybe more, positioned behind water troughs, wagons, and the skeleton of the burned barn. "They knew we'd come here," Margaret whispered from their position on the ridge. "They took Lena to draw us out," Eli agreed. "Question is, where is she?" Ruth lay flat beside them, studying the scene through Eli's field glasses. "There, root cellar behind the main house. 2 guards." She was already moving when Eli caught her arm. "Wait, we need a plan." "I have one. Get my sister." "Ruth, listen." He kept his voice low but urgent. "You go charging in there. You'll get killed. Then what happens to Lena? To Margaret?" She turned on him, eyes blazing even in the darkness. "Every second we wait is a second we use to do this right." He squeezed her shoulder. "Trust me." A rifle shot cracked through the night, splintering wood inches from Eli's head. "Well, well," Garrett's voice carried across the yard. "The sheriff and his lady loves— Come on down. Folks, we've been expecting you." Lamps flared to life around the ranch, destroying their cover of darkness. In the sudden light, Eli could see Lena tied to a post near the well, head down but apparently unharmed. "Let her go, Garrett," Ruth shouted. "It's me you want." "Actually, we want all of you, Shorty." Mr. Braddock's orders were real specific. The Hale sisters, and the lawman who betrayed his oath. Some oaths are worth betraying. Eli called back. "Maybe, but you know what doesn't matter. You got 2 choices. Sheriff, come down peaceful-like, or we start target practice, starting with the young one." Garrett drew his pistol, aiming at Lena. "No!" Ruth started to rise, but Margaret pulled her down. "He's baiting you," Margaret hissed. 1, Garrett counted. 2, Eli's mind raced. 8 men, spread out, good cover for them, minimal for his group. But then he noticed something movement in the shadows beyond the lamplight, shapes creeping closer to Braddock's men. 3, wait. Eli stood slowly, hands visible. "We're coming down." "Eli, no." Ruth grabbed for him, but he was already moving. Trust me, he said again. Louder this time, loud enough to carry. As Eli walked into the open, Ruth and Margaret had no choice but to follow. They descended the slope. Ruth's every muscle tense for action. That's far enough, Garrett ordered when they were 20 yards away. Guns on the ground. First let the girl go, Eli countered. You're not in a position to negotiate, Sheriff. Maybe not. Eli smiled grimly. But you might want to tell your men to check behind them. Garrett's smirk faltered. He started to turn. The night erupted, not with gunfire, but with the solid thunk of wood meeting skulls. Braddock's men dropped like cut wheat as townspeople emerged from the shadows. Hank Morrison, Pastor Reese, even Doc Avery wielding his medical bag like a club. Garrett spun, trying to process the ambush, and Ruth didn't waste the opportunity. She launched herself at him, catching him around the waist and driving him to the ground. They rolled in the dust, fighting for control of his gun. A shot fired wild, then another. Margaret ran for Lena while Eli engaged two of Braddock's men who'd avoided the townspeople's attack. Ruth and Garrett crashed into a water trough, sending it toppling. She came up gasping, but with the gun in her hand. "Don't move," she panted, aiming at Garrett's chest. He laughed, blood running from his nose. "You won't shoot me. You're not a killer." "My mother thought that too, right up until you murdered her." Garrett's eyes widened. "How did you talk in your sleep, Garrett?" The voice came from above. Mrs. Boyle stood on the porch, her late husband's shotgun trained on him. "All those nights you spent at my boarding house, drinking yourself stupid. Heard some real interesting things. You old witch. Names don't hurt much when you're holding a scattergun. Boy." The fight was over in minutes. 8 of Braddock's men subdued or surrendering, the townspeople standing over them with a mix of fear and exhilaration on their faces. Margaret had freed Lena, holding her tight. The youngest Hale sister looked shaken but defiant. "Tried to make me tell them where the deed was," Lena said. "I told them I'd burned it." "Did you?" Eli asked. Lena smiled shakily. "No, it's in the church altar. Figured even Braddock wouldn't violate sanctuary." "Smart girl." Eli turned to address the group. "All right, folks, we've got prisoners to secure and—" The thunder of hooves cut him off. Riders approaching fast. Many riders. "That'll be Mr. Braddock," Garrett said, grinning through his bloody mouth. "Backup plan. You didn't think we'd really come alone?" Eli counted the dust plumes in the moonlight. 12, maybe 15 riders. Too many. "Everyone into the house," he ordered. "We'll make our stand there." They barricaded quickly furniture against windows, water barrels filled, ammunition distributed. The townspeople looked scared but determined. They'd crossed a line tonight. No going back now. "I count 14, Ruth reported from an upstairs window. "Braddock's in the lead." "Let me talk to him," Margaret said. "Maybe I can—" "No." Ruth checked her rifle. "We're done talking." The riders surrounded the house, just out of effective rifle range. Silas Braddock rode forward, sitting his horse like a king surveying rebellious subjects. "Sheriff Mercer," he called. "You've caused me considerable trouble tonight." "Just getting started, Braddock," Eli replied. "I think not. See, Judge Pike's on his way with a full posse. Legal warrants for everyone in that house. But I'm feeling generous. Send out the Hale sisters, and the rest of you can walk away." "Like their mother walked away," Doc Avery shouted from a window. "I was there. Braddock, I saw what your men did." A ripple of unease went through Braddock's riders. Not all of them knew the full truth. Apparently— "Old man's delusional," Braddock said smoothly. "Been drinking his own medicinal whiskey." "I've been sober for 20 years, Doc shot back. "Sober enough to remember every detail. How she begged for her daughters' lives. How your men laughed." "Enough," Braddock's composure cracked. Burn them out, burn the whole place. But his men hesitated. These weren't hardened killers. Most of them. Just cowboys and miners who'd taken Braddock's coin. You hear that, boys? Eli called out. He wants you to burn women and townspeople alive. That the kind of men you are, the kind you want to be remembered as. First man to light a torch gets a bullet, Ruth added, her rifle visible in the window. That's a promise. The standoff stretched taut. Then one of Braddock's riders spoke up. Mr. Braddock, maybe we should wait for the judge. I give the orders, Braddock snarled. He drew his own gun, pointing it at the dissenting rider. Now do what you're told. The crack of a rifle split the night. Braddock's gun spun from his hand as he cried out, clutching his wrist. Next one goes in your chest, Ruth called down. That's also a promise. Everything might have erupted then, but new riders appeared on the horizon. Not Pike's posse, these men wore the unmistakable silhouette of cavalry uniforms. Is there a problem here? The officer's voice carried military authority as he rode up. I'm Captain Samuel Hayes, Fort Bridger. We received word of civil unrest. Captain. Eli emerged from the house, badge visible. Sheriff Eli Mercer, we've got a situation involving false warrants and attempted murder. That man's harboring fugitives, Braddock protested, cradling his wounded hand. That man's protecting citizens from a corrupt businessman and his hired thugs. Marshal Bradley said, appearing from among the cavalry. Evening. Captain, thanks for responding to my wire. The pieces fell into place. Bradley hadn't just come on his own, he'd brought federal authority. Mr. Braddock, Captain Hayes said formally. I'm placing you under military protection until this matter can be properly investigated. Your men will disperse immediately. You can't. I can and I will. Hayes' tone brooked no argument. Unless you'd prefer I investigate reports of attacks on civilian settlements, the Army takes a dim view of private warfare. Braddock's men were already melting away, wanting no part of federal attention. Soon only Braddock and Garrett remained, surrounded by soldiers. This isn't over, Braddock hissed at Eli. No, Ruth said, emerging from the house with her sisters. It's not. We'll see you at the trial. The real trial, where the truth comes out. As the cavalry led Braddock away, Lena tugged at Ruth's sleeve. I didn't tell you everything. When they grabbed me, I heard them talking. There's more than just the mine. Braddock's got partners back east, railroad money. They're planning something big. Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance, Eli said. Dawn was breaking as they returned to Twin Mercy. The town seemed different somehow, people standing straighter, meeting eyes instead of looking away. Word of the night's events had already spread. You did it, Margaret said to Eli. You gave them hope. We all did it, he corrected. Together. Ruth walked beside him, close enough that their hands occasionally brushed. That was a risky gamble, trusting the townspeople would follow. No riskier than you charging Garrett. I had motivation. She glanced at her sisters. What was yours? Eli met her eyes. You? Before she could respond, Pastor Reese approached. Sheriff, Miss Hale. Thought you should know Judge Thornton's arrived. He's setting up court in the church. Trial starts tomorrow. Then we'd better be ready, Ruth said. As the others dispersed to rest and prepare, Eli caught Ruth's arm. What you did tonight defending your sister, standing up to Braddock, your mother would be proud. Tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can get her justice. We will, Eli promised. Together. She kissed him then, quick and fierce, tasting of gunpowder and hope. For luck, she said, pulling away. Thought you didn't believe in luck. I'm starting to. As they walked toward the boarding house, Marshal Bradley fell into step beside them. Nice shooting back there, Miss Hale, where'd you learn to clip a gun hand at 50 yards in the dark? Ruth smiled. My mother taught me. Said a woman should be able to protect what's hers. Smart woman. The smartest? Tomorrow would bring the trial. Braddock's lawyers and Judge Pike's certain interference. But tonight, they'd won a victory. The town had stood up. Truth had a fighting chance. And in the morning light painting Twin Mercy's dusty streets gold, that felt like everything. Dawn hadn't yet touched the mountains when Eli and Ruth approached the mine office. The building squatted like a toad in the shadow of the abandoned eastern shaft, its windows dark and unwelcoming. Guards are changing shift, Ruth whispered, checking her pocket watch. We've got maybe 20 minutes. They'd left Margaret and Lena with Marshal Bradley, preparing for the trial that would begin in just 6 hours. But without concrete evidence of Braddock's crimes, even Judge Thornton couldn't override Pike's warrants. You still have Garrett's key? Eli asked. Ruth produced it from her coat. Question is whether Braddock changed the locks. Only one way to find out. They slipped through the pre-dawn shadows, Ruth moving with the same quiet grace she used around skittish horses. The key slid into the lock with a soft click. They were in. The office smelled of cigar smoke and greed. Eli lit a small lamp, keeping the flame low as they moved to the heavy safe behind Braddock's desk. Combination lock, Ruth muttered. Of course it couldn't be easy. Try the date of his first big strike. Eli suggested, men like Braddock, they're sentimental about their money. Ruth's fingers worked the dial. Nothing. She tried his birthday, the date Twin Mercy was founded, even the numbers from the Bible verse painted on the mine entrance. We're running out of time, Eli warned. Wait. Ruth studied the safe more closely. There, scratches on these numbers. He's been sloppy. She aligned the worn digits, 1852-30. The lock clicked open. Inside lay stacks of papers, gold certificates, and there, a leather-bound ledger, different from the public books. Ruth opened it, and even in the dim light, they could see this was what they needed. Look at this, she breathed. Payment to J. Garrett, $50, for permanent solution to Hale problem. Dated the night before Mama died. And here, Eli pointed to another entry. Payment to Pike for legal clearances, every month for 3 years. Page after page revealed the scope of Braddock's corruption, bribes, extortion, even murder for hire, all recorded in his own meticulous hand. Why keep such detailed records of his crimes? Ruth wondered. Insurance. Eli realized. If anyone turned on him, he could take them down too. Mutually assured destruction. Sheriff, the voice came from outside. I know you're in there. They froze. Not Garrett's voice, one of the mine supervisors. Tom Henley. Eli identified. He's not one of Braddock's gunmen. Come on out, Peaceful, Henley continued. I ain't looking for trouble, but Mr. Braddock's on his way. Got released on bail an hour ago. Ruth grabbed the ledger and a handful of other documents. Back door. Through the storage room. They ran, boots echoing on wooden floors. Behind them, the front door burst open. Stop right there. A shot fired, shattering a window inches from Ruth's head. They dove through the back exit into the gray pre-dawn. The horses are this way, Eli started. No, wait. Ruth pulled him behind the equipment shed. Listen. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Braddock hadn't come alone. They'll cut us off from town, Eli said grimly. Then we don't go to town. Not yet. Ruth's eyes gleamed with desperate inspiration. The Eastern Tunnel. It's flooded, sealed for 2 years. What if it's not Margaret heard rumors? What if Braddock sealed it to hide something? More shouts. Their pursuers were spreading out, forming a search grid. It's suicide, Eli argued. It's our only chance. Ruth gripped the stolen ledger. This book is our proof. But if they catch us, it disappears forever, along with us. A rider appeared around the corner. Eli tackled him from the horse, a brief struggle ending with the man unconscious. Ruth was already mounting the stolen horse. "Come on." They rode hard for the eastern shaft, pursued by angry shouts and gunfire. The entrance loomed before them, rough timber framing, danger signs posted everywhere, chains across the opening. "The chains are new," Ruth observed, dismounting. "Why chain a flooded tunnel?" Eli grabbed a crowbar from the nearby equipment. Together they pried at the locks until the chains fell away. Well. Braddock's voice made them spin. He sat his horse 20 yards away, flanked by 6 armed men. His right hand was bandaged from Ruth's shot the night before. The sheriff and his woman turned common thieves. "The only thief here is you," Ruth shot back. "That's a matter of perspective." Braddock's smile was cold. "Give me my property, and I might let the sheriff live. You're going to hang anyway, but he doesn't have to." "Generous offer," Eli said, stepping partially in front of Ruth. "Here's mine. Surrender now, and I'll testify you cooperated. Might save you from the noose." Braddock laughed. "You think that ledger matters? I own judges from here to Denver. That book disappears. You disappear. And life goes on. Then I guess we've got nothing to lose." Ruth backed toward the mine entrance. "Ruth, no," Eli warned. But she was already disappearing into the darkness. Without hesitation, Eli followed. The tunnel was not flooded. It was, however, a maze of support beams and side passages. Their stolen lamp threw dancing shadows as they stumbled deeper underground. "They're not following," Eli noted. "They know these tunnels. They'll try to cut us off." Ruth paused at a junction. "Wait, look at this." Fresh tool marks scarred the walls. Recent excavation. They've been mining illegally, Eli realized. After the official closure, they pressed on, following the signs of recent work. The tunnel opened into a natural cavern, and both stopped in amazement. Silver veins ran through the walls like frozen lightning, but that wasn't what caught their attention. It was the box's dozens of wooden crates marked U.S. Army and property of Wells Fargo. "The stage robberies last year," Ruth breathed. "Everyone blamed the Comanche." "Braddock blamed the Comanche," Eli corrected, while hiding the stolen goods in his flooded mine. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel, multiple sets converging on their position. "Up here," Ruth pointed to a narrow passage climbing at a steep angle. "Might be another way out." They climbed, rough stone tearing at their hands. Behind them, voices grew closer. The passage narrowed until they were crawling. "Dead end," Eli said as his hands hit solid rock. "No, feel that air movement. There's an opening." Ruth attacked the rocks with desperate energy. Sunlight. A crack of blessed sunlight. They hammered at the opening until it was wide enough to squeeze through. They emerged on the hillside above the mine, the morning sun blinding after the darkness. Below, they could see riders circling the main entrance like angry wasps. "The church," Ruth panted. "We need to get this to Judge Thornton." They stumbled down the hillside, using scrub brush for cover. A shout went up as they were spotted, but they had a good lead now. The town appeared ahead, already bustling with activity. Word of the trial had brought people from miles around. They burst onto Main Street at full speed, horses lathered and wild-eyed. "The church!" Eli shouted to confused onlookers. "Clear the way!" They thundered down the street, Braddock's men close behind. The church doors loomed ahead. Marshal Bradley stood on the steps, hand on his gun. "Inside," he ordered, covering their dismount. "Quickly!" They stumbled through the doors to find the church packed. Judge Thornton sat at a makeshift bench, looking up in surprise as they entered. "Your Honor," Eli gasped, holding up the ledger. Evidence. Critical evidence. This is highly irregular. Sheriff. So is murder. Ruth stepped forward, dirt-smudged but fierce. This book contains proof that Silas Braddock paid to have my mother killed. Proof he's bribed officials, stolen government property, and terrorized this town for years. The church doors burst open. Braddock strode in with his men, then stopped short at the sight of the packed courtroom. Your Honor, he said smoothly, these people broke into my private office, stole private property, which documents systematic criminal activity. Eli interrupted. Allegedly. Judge Pike interjected from his seat. You can't simply present stolen materials as evidence. Actually, Judge Thornton said mildly, I can admit any evidence I deem relevant to the pursuit of justice. Sheriff Mercer, Miss Hale, please approach. As they walked forward, Ruth felt the weight of every eye in the room, somewhere in the crowd. She saw Margaret holding Lena's hand. Doc Avery nodded encouragingly. Pastor Reese stood ready to testify. Your Honor, Ruth said, voice carrying clear, I request the right to present this evidence, not just the ledger, but also what we found in the supposedly flooded eastern tunnel. Objection. Pike stood. There's no proof they found anything. Then let's go look. Eli suggested. Send a detail to the eastern tunnel. See the stolen army supplies, the Wells Fargo gold, the illegal mining operation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Braddock's face had gone pale. Furthermore, Ruth continued, opening the ledger. I can provide context for every entry in this book, including this one. She pointed to a specific line. Payment to Judge Pike, $500. For special consideration in water rights dispute. Pike's face went red. That's a lie. Your own signature is on the receipt. Margaret called out from the crowd. I've seen it on enough false warrants to recognize it. But we have something even more definitive. Lena's young voice rang out. She stood, slight but unwavering. I have an exceptional memory. Your Honor, what some call total recall, I can recite, word for word, conversations I overheard while held captive. She closed her eyes and began to speak in Garrett's rough tones. Boss says to keep the girl until the trial's done. Says once her sisters are hung, she'll sign over them mineral rights quick enough, just like her mama should have before we had to— Enough, Braddock roared. The girl's making it up. Then you won't mind if we verify her ability. Judge Thornton picked up a law book, read a random paragraph silently, then handed it to Lena. Miss Hale, if you would— Lena read the paragraph once, handed the book back, and recited it perfectly. The crowd gasped. Satisfied, Mr. Braddock? Thornton asked dryly. Now, Miss Lena, please continue your recitation. As Lena spoke, recreating overheard conversations with chilling accuracy, the case against Braddock built word by damning word. Your Honor. Braddock's lawyer finally stood. Regardless of these dramatic presentations, my client has rights. He has the right to a fair trial, Thornton agreed, which he'll receive in federal court. Marshal Bradley. Sir, I'm ordering the arrest of Silas Braddock on charges of murder, theft of government property, conspiracy, and corruption of public officials. I'm also ordering the arrest of Judge Artemis Pike on charges of accepting bribes and perverting the course of justice. You can't do this, Pike protested as Bradley's deputies moved in. I'm a federal judge. Thornton reminded him, I can and I will. As the arrests proceeded, Braddock locked eyes with Ruth. You've destroyed everything I built. You destroyed yourself, she replied. The moment you decided my mother's life was worth less than silver. They led him away in chains, Pike following. The courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked whispers. Miss Hale. Judge Thornton addressed Ruth formally. In light of the evidence presented, I'm dismissing all charges against you and your sisters. Furthermore, I'm ordering the return of all properties illegally seized by Mr. Braddock, with compensation to be determined in civil court. Ruth sagged against Eli, suddenly exhausted. It was over. They'd won. One more thing, Thornton added. Sheriff Mercer, you've shown exceptional courage and integrity. I'll be recommending you for a federal marshal position, if you're interested. Eli looked at Ruth, a silent question in his eyes. She smiled, nodding. Thank you, Your Honor, but I think I'll stay in Twin Mercy. Seems like the town might need some honest law for a change. As people filed out, talking excitedly about the morning's events, Ruth found herself outside with her sisters and Eli. The sun was climbing higher, painting the mountains gold. We did it, Mama, she whispered to the sky. We got justice. She'd be proud, Margaret said, taking her hand. Of all of us, Lena added, clutching the salvaged ledger. Eli wrapped an arm around Ruth's shoulders. What now? Now, Ruth looked up at him. Now we rebuild, make this town what it should be, together. Together, he agreed. In the distance, a train whistle sounded the railroad that would soon bring new life to Twin Mercy. But for now, in this moment, justice was enough. Justice, family, and the promise of tomorrow. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows that had lingered too long over Twin Mercy. And for the first time in years, the town felt clean. The courthouse square had never seen such a crowd. Folks came from 3 counties away, filling every bench and standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. The federal trial of Silas Braddock had become the event of the year. Judge Thornton's gavel rang out like a gunshot. This court will come to order. We are here to determine the guilt or innocence of Silas Braddock on multiple federal charges, including murder, theft of government property, and corruption. Braddock sat at the defendant's table, his expensive lawyer beside him. Even now, facing the gallows, he maintained that air of arrogant authority that had terrorized Twin Mercy for so long. The prosecution calls Miss Ruth Hale. Ruth rose from her seat, smoothing her simple dress. She'd refused Margaret's offer of something fancier. This wasn't about appearances. Miss Hale, the federal prosecutor began. Please tell the court about the night of September 15th. Ruth's voice carried clear and strong. My sisters and I were at home when we heard horses approaching. Mama sent us to hide in the root cellar. Through the cracks in the floorboards, we saw Cole Garrett and 2 other men enter our house. Objection, Braddock's lawyer stood. The witness cannot identify men she allegedly saw through floorboards in darkness. I knew Garrett's voice, Ruth continued calmly. He'd been to our ranch before, trying to pressure Mama into selling our water rights. That night, he said Mr. Braddock was tired of waiting. And then, Ruth's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. We heard Mama fighting, heard her refuse to sign papers. Then we heard the shots. The courtroom was silent except for someone's muffled sob. What happened next? We stayed hidden until dawn. When we finally came out, Ruth's voice caught. Mama was gone. There was blood, and the papers Garrett wanted her to sign were still on the table, torn in half. Why didn't you report this to the authorities? Ruth looked directly at Pike, who sat in his own shackles among the defendants. Because the authorities worked for Braddock, we knew we'd be next if we stayed. The testimony continued for hours. Ruth detailed their flight, the attempt on their lives, the systematic terror Braddock had inflicted on the town. Through it all, Braddock watched her with cold fury. When the defense attorney cross-examined, he came out swinging. Miss Hale, isn't it true you're wanted for robbery and assault? Those charges have been dismissed. Judge Thornton interjected, but they were active when Sheriff Mercer chose to protect you. Tell me, Miss Hale, what exactly is your relationship with the sheriff? Heat rose in Ruth's cheeks. He's a man of honor who chose justice over corruption. Is that all? Eli started to rise from his seat, but Marshal Bradley held him back. Sheriff Mercer risked everything to help us. Ruth said firmly, "If that makes him more than just a lawman to me, I'm not ashamed of it." So you admit to having romantic feelings for the man whose testimony could save you from the gallows. I admit to recognizing courage when I see it. Ruth shot back, "Something you might not understand, counselor." Snickers ran through the crowd. Even Judge Thornton hid a smile. Next came Margaret, whose analytical mind had pieced together Braddock's financial crimes. She presented her findings with devastating precision, showing how every accident corresponded with Braddock's ledger entries. Lena took the stand with quiet dignity. Her perfect recall of overheard conversations left the defense scrambling. "The human memory is fallible," the lawyer argued desperately. "Then test me," Lena challenged. "Have anyone in this courtroom say anything, a poem, a passage, anything. I'll prove my memory is accurate." Judge Thornton nodded to the bailiff, who read a complex legal statute. Lena repeated it word for word, then recited it backward for good measure. The defense had no response. Doc Avery testified next, his aged hands trembling as he described treating Catherine Hale's wounds. "She knew she was dying," he said quietly. "Made me promise to protect her girls if I could. I failed in that promise for too long, but I won't fail now." One by one, townspeople took the stand. Hank Morrison talked about his brother's death. Mrs. Boyle revealed conversations she'd overheard at her boarding house. Even some of Braddock's former employees, granted immunity, testified about the criminal operations. The evidence was overwhelming, but the defense had one more card to play. "We call Silas Braddock to the stand." Braddock rose like a king addressing peasants. Even facing ruin, he radiated confidence. "Mr. Braddock," his lawyer began, "tell us your side of these events." "Gladly." Braddock's voice filled the courtroom. "I built Twin Mercy from nothing. When I arrived, it was a collection of shacks and broken dreams. I brought prosperity, jobs, order. And the allegations against you, lies spread by ungrateful people who couldn't succeed on their own merit. Yes, I'm a hard businessman. Yes, I've made enemies, but every great man does." "What about the Hale family?" Braddock's expression hardened. "Catherine Hale was unstable. Her husband died owing me money. When I tried to collect legally, she became violent. Whatever happened to her wasn't my doing." "Then how do you explain your ledger entries? Private business notations taken out of context?" The prosecutor rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Braddock, you say you built Twin Mercy, but isn't it true the town was founded by Spanish missionaries a century before you arrived?" "I made it what it is today. By stealing water rights, by forcing families off their land, by making hard choices weak men couldn't make. Like the choice to murder Catherine Hale." "I never touched that woman." "No, you just paid others to do it." The prosecutor held up the ledger. "Your own handwriting, Mr. Braddock. Payment for permanent solution to Hale problem." "That could mean anything." "Could it? Then perhaps you can explain this entry 3 days later. Eastern Valley rights secured. Hale obstacle removed." Braddock's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand. This territory needs strong leadership, men like me, who aren't afraid to do what's necessary." "Necessary?" The prosecutor's voice rose. "Was it necessary to burn the Morrison barn with their prize mare? Inside necessary to poison the Hendricks? Well necessary to leave 3 young women orphaned. I made Twin Mercy rich. You made yourself rich on the blood of innocents." "Order!" Judge Thornton banged his gavel. "Mr. Braddock, please answer the question directly. Did you or did you not order the death of Catherine Hale?" Braddock stood silent for a long moment. Then, With the arrogance that had always been his defining trait, he smiled. She stood in the way of progress. The railroad is coming. This town could be great, a hub of commerce and industry. But people like the Hales, clinging to their little plots of land. Their outdated claims they would have kept us all in poverty. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. "So you admit to ordering her murder?" Judge Thornton pressed. "I admit to making the hard choices this territory demanded. If that makes me guilty in the eyes of weak men, so be it." The jury didn't deliberate long. When they filed back in, not one would meet Braddock's eyes. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft of government property, guilty. On the charge of corruption of public officials, guilty." The litany continued. Guilty on all counts. Judge Thornton's sentence was swift and merciless. "Silas Braddock, you are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment at hard labor. Your assets will be liquidated to provide restitution to your victims." As they led Braddock away, he locked eyes with Ruth one last time. "You've destroyed everything. The town will wither without me." "No," Ruth said quietly. "It'll finally have a chance to grow." The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in hushed, excited voices about the new future opening before them. The Hale sisters stood together in the courthouse square, surrounded by friends who'd become family. "It's over," Margaret said, wonder in her voice. "The trial is," Eli agreed, joining them. "The real work starts now, rebuilding, making things right." Pastor Reese approached, beaming. "Ladies, I've just come from an emergency town meeting. In light of recent events, we need new leadership. The vote was unanimous. They want Sheriff Mercer to continue, and they're offering the Hale family first claim on any of Braddock's former properties." "The Eastern Valley," Lena said immediately. "That's what Mama would want, to build something good where so much bad happened." "Then that's what we'll do," Ruth decided. As the sun set over Twin Mercy, painting the sky in shades of hope, Ruth found herself standing with Eli at the edge of town, looking out at the land that would soon be theirs. "You did it," he said softly. "You got justice for your mother." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us, the whole town." "That's what justice really is, isn't it?" Eli mused. "Not just punishment for the guilty, but a community choosing to stand for what's right." Ruth leaned into his solid warmth. "Mama used to say that evil flourishes when good people stay silent. Today, they found their voices. Thanks to 3 brave women who reminded them what courage looks like." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear. Tomorrow would bring challenges rebuilding the town's economy, establishing new leadership, healing old wounds. But tonight, there was peace. "Eli," Ruth said softly. "Yeah." "That federal marshal position Judge Thornton mentioned, you really turned it down." "I did." "Why?" He turned to face her fully. "Because everything I want is right here. The town needs a sheriff they can trust. Your sisters need stability, and you—" He cupped her face gently. "You need someone who'll stand beside you while you build that ranch and raise those horses and change this territory for the better." "And what do you need?" she whispered. "I need to be that someone." He answered simply, "If you'll have me." Instead of answering with words, Ruth pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of justice served and promises kept. In the distance, a coyote howled at the rising moon. But for the first time in years, it sounded not like a threat, but like freedom. The transformation of Twin Mercy had begun, and with it, the healing of hearts too long held captive by fear and loss. Justice had been served not with vengeance, but with truth. And in the end, that made all the difference. 6 months after Braddock's trial, Twin Mercy barely resembled the fear-gripped town it had once been. The old mine office had become a school, with Lena teaching 23 eager pupils. The wells ran clear again, properly managed by a council of townspeople instead of one man's greed. And at the Eastern Valley Ranch, the sound of hammers and saws rang out as new buildings took shape. Ruth stood in the corral, working with a young Mustang. When she heard the familiar jingle of spurs, she didn't need to turn to know who it was. "Morning, Sheriff," she called, keeping her attention on the horse. "Morning, Miss Hale," Eli replied, though the formality was ruined by the warmth in his voice. "Though I'm thinking we might want to change that." Ruth finally turned, eyebrow raised. "Change what?" "The Miss Hale part." He dismounted, pulling something from his saddlebag. "See, I've been talking to Pastor Reese, and he says he's got time in his schedule next month." "Time for what?" Ruth asked, though her heart was already racing. "Well, that depends." Eli opened his hand, revealing a simple gold band. "Ruth Hale, you've already trusted me with your life. Think you might trust me with your future, too." Before Ruth could answer, a whoop came from the newly finished barn. Margaret and Lena tumbled out, clearly having been eavesdropping. "Say yes," Lena called, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "She'd be a fool not to," Margaret added, though she was smiling wider than Ruth had seen in years. Ruth looked at her sisters, then at the man who'd stood by them when the whole world seemed against them. "You sure you know what you're getting into? Eli Mercer, we Hale women are a handful." "I'm counting on it," he said softly. "Then yes," Ruth let him slip the ring onto her finger. "Yes to next month. Yes to the future. Yes to everything." The kiss that followed was interrupted by more whooping, this time from the ranch hands who'd gathered to watch. Even the Mustang seemed interested, nosing at Eli's shoulder. "I suppose we should tell the town," Ruth said when they finally parted. "I think they already know," Margaret said dryly, pointing to the road where Mrs. Boyle's buggy was racing back toward town, the innkeeper clearly bursting with gossip. The wedding, when it came, transformed Twin Mercy into a celebration the likes of which the territory had never seen. The church overflowed with wildflowers Lena and her students had gathered. Margaret, as maid of honor, wore their mother's pearl necklace, one of the few treasures saved from their old life. Doc Avery gave Ruth away, his eyes misty as he whispered, "Your mother would be so proud." Marshal Thomas Bradley stood as Eli's best man, having returned from Denver for the occasion. "Never thought I'd see the day Eli Mercer let happiness catch up with him," he said in his toast. "But then, Ruth Hale seems capable of impossible things." The reception filled the entire main street. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family in town. The new miners, honest men working honest claims, played fiddles and guitars. Children ran between the dancers, their laughter bright as silver. "No fancy honeymoon trip," Margaret teased as Ruth changed from her wedding dress into traveling clothes. "We're just going to the hot springs for a few days," Ruth replied. "Too much work to do here to be gone long?" "The work will keep," Margaret said firmly. "You've earned some happiness, Ruth, both of you have." When Ruth and Eli returned, they found the ranch transformed even further. The townspeople had surprised them with a new house, built with lumber donated from the old Braddock warehouse and labor freely given. "Welcome home," Caleb Dunn said, handing over the keys. The old rancher had returned to Twin Mercy, drawn by the town's rebirth. "Figured you'd need more than that old cabin once the little ones start coming." Ruth blushed while Eli grinned. "Getting ahead of yourself, aren't you, Caleb?" "At my age, I've learned not to waste time," Caleb replied with a wink. The Eastern Valley Ranch became a symbol of the new Twin Mercy. Ruth's horse training program grew to include therapy for injured veterans of the Indian Wars, men who'd lost limbs or hope found both purpose and healing working with the animals. "Horses don't care if you're missing pieces," Ruth told one bitter former soldier. "They only care if your heart's true." Lena's school expanded too. She recruited teachers from back east, promising them adventure and purpose. Soon, Twin Mercy had something almost unheard of in the territorial lending library. "Knowledge is power," Lena said at the library's dedication, "and power should belong to everyone, not just the wealthy." Margaret, never one for the spotlight, quietly revolutionized the town's water management. Her system of shared wells and irrigation channels became a model for other growing communities. "It's just common sense," she'd say when praised. "Resources should serve the community, not control it." One evening, a year after the wedding, Margaret found herself walking with Deputy Marshal Bradley Thomas. He'd asked her to call him. He'd been visiting more frequently, always with some official excuse that fooled no one. "Your sisters built something remarkable here," Thomas said, "watching the sunset paint the mountains gold." "We all have," Margaret corrected. "Even you. Those federal marshals you've stationed nearby have discouraged more than one would-be Braddock." "Just doing my job." "Is that all?" Margaret asked, echoing the question once posed to Ruth in a courtroom. Thomas stopped walking, turning to face her. "Margaret Hale, you're the smartest woman I've ever met. Surely you figured out these visits aren't entirely professional." "I've had my suspicions," Margaret admitted, a rare smile playing at her lips. And I think I should introduce you to Pastor Reese. He seems to be good at scheduling weddings." Meanwhile, at the sheriff's office, Eli was finishing his evening rounds when Ruth appeared in the doorway. "You're late for supper," she said. "Sorry, had to settle a dispute between the Murphy boys and the new settlers. Nothing serious, just a misunderstanding about fence lines." The kind of misunderstanding that used to end in gunfire, Ruth observed, but didn't. That's progress. Eli hung up his hat and pulled her close. "How you feeling? Doc Avery said you should be taking it easy." Ruth's hand went to her still flat belly. "I'm fine. We're fine. Though I suppose I'll have to let Margaret take over the Mustang training soon." "Temporarily," Eli stressed. "Just temporarily." "Everything changes," Ruth murmured. "But somehow, that doesn't scare me anymore." "Because we're building something that lasts," Eli said, not on fear like Braddock did, but on trust, community, love. As they walked home together, the streets of Twin Mercy hummed with life. The saloon still did good business, but now it competed with a theater company that performed twice monthly. The general store displayed goods from the railroad that finally connected their town to the wider world. Children played in streets their parents had once feared to walk. "You know what Mama would say if she could see this?" Ruth asked suddenly. "What's that?" "She'd say mercy isn't just a name. It's a choice, every day. We choose mercy over vengeance, hope over fear, building over destroying." Ruth paused at their gate, looking back at the thriving town. She'd say we chose right. That night, as they sat on their porch watching the stars, Ruth wore a simple calico dress, her own this time. No disguises needed. The silver cross that had once betrayed them now hung openly at her throat, catching the lamplight. "No regrets?" Eli asked, his hand covering hers. "How could I regret any path that led us here?" Ruth replied. "Every loss, every fear, every desperate choice, they all brought us home." "Home," Eli repeated, the word carrying weight it never had in his lonely years. "I like the sound of that." In the distance, a train whistle announced the evening arrival from Denver. New settlers, new opportunities, new challenges. But Twin Mercy was ready for them all. The town sign, recently repainted, now included a new motto beneath the name, "Mercy is Strength." It had been Lena's idea, voted on by the whole community, painted by the school children in careful letters. As Ruth and Eli headed inside their home, their true home, built on justice served and love earned, the mountains stood eternal guard over a town reborn. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest with truth and courage. The future stretched ahead, bright with promise. And in the sheriff's house at the end of Main Street, where laughter replaced loneliness and hope had conquered fear, two hearts that had found each other in the darkness settled in for another night of peace. The transformation was complete. From the ashes of corruption and violence, Twin Mercy had risen stronger, kinder, and more beautiful than before. It had become what Catherine Hale had dreamed of, a place where justice and mercy walked hand in hand, where the strong protected the weak instead of preying on them, and where love could flourish like wildflowers after rain. The Hale sisters had sought justice for their mother. What they'd found was so much more: a home, a community, and the truth that sometimes the greatest revenge against evil is simply choosing to build something good in its place. As the lamp dimmed in the sheriff's window, and Twin Mercy settled into peaceful sleep, the stars watched over a town that had chosen mercy, and in that choice, they had all found their strength. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, justice, and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please leave a comment and let me know what touched your heart in Ruth and Eli's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from Twin Mercy, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of courage and hope from the frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover these tales of the American West. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunrise.